Thank you all for joining me here today. I am with the vibrant Jenn Tasnim Savage, and we are going to dive into Jen's own story. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So happy to be here with you.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join me. Where did your healing journey begin?
That's such a big question for me. It's like, how far back do I go? I mean, I think like all of us, right? Especially if we're people for whom we have spiritual awareness, we feel called to a healing path, we're kind of awakening to a new way of being. I think there are things that begin prior to this incarnation or at the beginning of the choice we made for our soul's learning in this life, and that there are so many points along the way that our human experiences things as our soul is sort of waking up to the truth of who it is, right? So I mean, I incarnated into a very challenging, dark, lots of violence, lots of poverty, some really challenging kind of human lived experience, which kind of set the tone for the seeds. Joseph Campbell talks about the cave we most fear to enter are where the biggest treasures lie, right? And so for me, I've had multiple opportunities along the way to return back into some of those shadow places and really hard spots and extract some treasures. So in that sense, I feel like I've always been on this journey.
Right? I have to agree. I often say that it was the womb. Like from the
Right,
moment I was conceived, something was not right.
right.
Until, the cycles I was born into were eventually broken decades later.
Exactly. And that is the thing, right? It's the seed of what our soul came to metabolize, to purify, to change. It's like to break that generational trauma cycle, to really say, oh, I'm the one that this stops here with me, right? So, yeah, I feel deeply resonant with that. For me, it was I have an awareness of before coming into the womb and being feeling really duped that I was going to be born a girl. I was like, oh no, not that. Because I know how hard that is. I know how much pain comes through that experience, especially in the world we live in today, right? So for me, I feel like that resistance and that, and the journey I've taken around my sexuality and my gender confusion and my questioning of self-worth and then kind of moving through all those layers and really discovering the sanctity and the holiness of what the feminine actually carries and how there's so much power, even though it seems like from an external standpoint it's the weaker sex, or so just this interplay on like perceived reality and what the deeper sacred truth is. So that just has felt like a very big piece of my journey.
See, and I love that you say that because gender is such a big thing, even though it shouldn't be in our society. I
Right.
mean, we have boobs. They should let us run the world just because of that. That
Exactly.
there's no weakness. All we have to do is flash them, and suddenly we are in control.
Well, and it's also we give life, right? I mean, it's like it's through the feminine that life comes to be, and then bringing that out into the earth and the world. It's like she is powerful, right? It's the
Exactly.
land we live upon. So,
And
and in my family lineage, there was so much hatred towards the feminine, which is, it's not unique to me. I think it's general in a lot of places. But just like the feminine was not revered and held up and protected and cared for in the way that as we write the patriarchy and come into alignment with this unity and the balance, where we're masculine and feminine are both in their power roles and right relationship with each other, and so just a lot of that has informed my becoming.
unfortunately, that is so common for so many of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very indigenous on my mother's side, and yet my alive lineage very much struggled with both being queer and two-spirit. When
Right.
I transitioned many years ago, that was an entire shitstorm.
I I cannot imagine.
And I had to say to my very Cree grandfather, hey, if you're indigenous, you need to be in line with our culture and accept this.
Yes.
And then he also went off about that because of his own shame being of the baby boomer era and existing in one of the most turbulent times being indigenous
And stripped of his medicine,
and
probably
the
from a
culture.
very right. I mean,
And for me to turn around and be trained as a medicine woman, along with my background in high risk social work, he both loves and loathes it. Well,
right,
why are you existing in the old ways? Because our old ways are the ways through, where we merge with this cluster that's going on and we honor both in some
absolutely,
sort of balance, will be the only way that we actually see the unity and the peace of an entire people.
right. And that's the key, right? It is a unity of an entire people. And that's a pretty highly evolved concept because most people operate in separation, right? It's like you win means I lose. Therefore, I will fight for my rights or my it's like what is this creation where we all, and it feels, like we're a long way from that, but on the path to that for people who understand it and whose souls came to say, this is actually what I stand for. I stand for the marriage between spirit and matter, masculine and feminine, right? For the unification of of reality in all of its many layers, so that wholeness, we return to a state of wholeness in our experience with ourself, and then therefore with every other human that we meet along the way, right?
It exactly. And that homeostasis within ourselves. I am very fortunate to, despite my own experiences, achieved it very young. People often crack up on me for talking like a wise elder. But it's that I don't care. Any
Yeah. Well, and
minor
it's
any
what your
minor
soul came in
difference
with, right? I mean,
between
it's like,
us,
yeah,
they don't matter.
yeah,
It's the big picture. It's the you're human and I'm human. So when you talk about your pain, your struggle, your experience, I'm not here to diminish it. I'm here to give it space and honor it.
right. And it's in that witnessing, right? It's like we become so isolated and defined by the pain and all of those ego structures that we put in place to survive the pain we experienced, right? And this is like working with the trauma of like, oh, it's through connection and acceptance where I can the guard that I have put up to protect myself, which keeps me separate from these greater realities, can start softening, and I can metabolize that, and then safety. I can find safety in connection. I can find safety in other. But when we're in this primal state of hypervigilance and the way trauma really deeply impacts our nervous system, it's hard to, even if our soul has that awareness, it's hard to live from that place because we still have so much residual pain, like really defining our actions, our thoughts, our beliefs, our words.
I completely agree. Because as long as you're in that primal or even a flight, fight, freeze, or fawn state,
Absolutely.
there's no actual existence. You are on autopilot to keep the vessel safe.
Absolutely. And that's
And
like base level consciousness. It's from there the beautification of our life can really start developing, right? The thriving can happen. But and for me, we've got to get into the root. We've got to be able to go into that shadow place that like really does feel like we might die. Like my spiritual teacher always said, you have to die 1,000 deaths, right? You must die before you die. And it's, oh yeah, that part of me that's trying so hard to keep me safe is not living in a place of freedom or connection or love, you know? And how do we work with the nervous system and this deeper spiritual wisdom that lives within us, to really free ourselves from those patterns and habits that we so often inherit and learn through our family lineages.
Exactly. And while we are all spiritual beings, we often forget that we are biologically wired to just protect ourselves. And that is why you end up isolated, alone, in complete solitude after you gain the joyous experience of PTSD.
Right. Yeah. Well, we want to mitigate anything that might feel like, or, you know, our sensory system is like danger, right? Anything that's too creates too much sensation or too much input is, we're just in a no. And I'm on my own journey of, I have established over many, many years a deep sense of self. Like I love who I am becoming. I am not reacting to everything. I'm not overstimulated by my environment anymore. Right. And so I have that calm, sort of grounded thing. And I realize, oh, that's only step one, because where I'm going now is into something more dynamic. It's like, now that I have the calm and centered self, I need to teach my nervous system how to now be dynamic, to be active, to not just crave the safety of my meditation cushion, but to be alive and active in the world in spite of what is happening in it, right? So this is that really kind of juicy edge I'm at of, whew, okay, I've achieved a lot in my commitment to self in my healing journey, and that's just a beginning plateau that now requires something new. Um, and you know, it's taken me a long time to get here, so I'm grateful for it. And now I'm like, oh, and now it's for something. And it's just like dynamic. The word dynamic keeps coming to me of like, now it's time to be active in my life, to take what I now have and move it out into the world to be effective in a way that can really implement change.
And when we get to that point in our healing, it's the dynamicness of reintegrating into our lives and society.
Right.
Like when you can take everything you've learned spiritually in therapy, coaching, whatever, and you can actually practically apply it while still maintaining that calm state, no matter what you're doing. And
Right.
yes, there are going to be times where you are very anxious about this, or times when it capsizes a little bit and it doesn't go to plan, and then you shell back up for a little bit. But because you have that baseline calm and safety, it's much easier to get back to a place of, well, I'm going to try and be out in the world in this capacity today.
Right. And it's that, you know, titration, right? It's like, what small amount can I do without blowing out my system and having to recover from it, from overwhelm or overstimulation? And we all have a different journey based on what our experience has been. But I'm really trying to push those edges a little bit in my life. And you know, sometimes I feel better than my body is actually ready for. Like my spirit wants to do a little more, and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have a day of rest today because that was a little bit too much yesterday, or you know, and really just finding what that balance is. But it's only in kind of meeting that threshold and pushing beyond it a little bit that my nervous system can grow and actually return to and engage in life. And I think coming out of this crazy pandemic experience we've all had, whether we have PTSD or CPTSD or, you know, trauma that we're working on, just that experience alone and the isolation and just the social distancing and just the habits that we now have, even our nervous or our immune systems, like everyone is just like getting so sick right now because we haven't been exposed to anything in years. It's like our systems are trying to figure out like, oh, how do I do this thing called life that stopped for so long for so many of us, right? um,
Exactly.
and just the importance of returning to community and getting out and doing the thing that will nourish us, even if we kind of sort of feel like we would rather not. you
Right.
know
Well, and sometimes I have the spiritual and the physical and the emotional energy, but I lack the social.
right.
So when leaving my house that day, it will be no, long haul walk. I will see people, I will smile. I might engage if they say hello. But that might be the limit today.
Right.
Because it doesn't always have to be, go hang out with all your cheery, upbeat friends that you
Right.
can't stand when a part of you is still hurting or healing.
Right.
No,
Well, I mean, it's like you said, it's like smiling at the person in the grocery store, like making the effort for, again, these small bits of connection. Like, I actually had this amazing conversation with somebody sitting next to me at my table at breakfast the other day. And I rarely ever just like start speaking to strangers. I'm so introverted, and I'm so and it turns out like it was kismet. Like I needed to connect with this person, and I'm suddenly now excited that maybe I have a new friend, and how beautiful that this might turn into something that is nourishing in a way that I never would have had I just stayed with my coffee and kind of kept my head down in that way. So it's the risk of opening up and all of the beauty, even if it's just that smile in the grocery store, but the
e-
possibility and potential of connection that just comes in surprising ways that we might not be expecting.
exactly. I have some very fulfilling conversations on public transit.
Awesome.
And even randomly when I want a singular craft beer, so I go to a nice brewery, and the person that sits down beside me, they didn't just need a conversation with me, they also needed the knowledge that I was the only one in the room that had.
Right.
And they didn't know before I said hello. I'm like, no, that there definitely has to be something higher, because you wouldn't meet strangers like that absolutely needed the conversation and the exact topic that it went through if there wasn't something.
I agree. I agree. And I think those little nudges of divine are always there guiding us. It's like, and so often what happens, and the work I do with my clients is really slowing down and quieting the noise so that you can act, because what happens in trauma is we know what is true and right for us. And so often we override that or make somebody else's needs more important than our own. It's like these little self betrayals where we stop listening to that intuition and our guidance, right? And so it's like that nudge is always there, but so often the conditioning just becomes the noise that covers it up, or it's like, so we're not really like hearing it and then acting on it, right? Hearing it and acting on it. So it's these moments with another human where we're reminded, like, see, there is this bigger thing that is always trying to support and guide us. And we just, in that moment, you've started the conversation, right? It's like, okay, great connection point. But I think that spiritual guidance and that mechanism within us is always trying to lead us towards something nourishing and healing for us.
I have to agree. And even if you just leave it at calling it your intuition or your gut feeling, there's
Right.
always something telling us what to do next or what to do in the present situation. And like you, working with trauma, it's a lot of learning how to be comfortable with your uncomfortable feelings and thoughts.
100%.
And like even before we get to the point of a trauma release session where we deep dive it, it's the let's unpack this. Let's sit with it. I don't care if you cry, you laugh. I don't care if that laughter is psychotic. As long as you were processing what's actually going on inside you, so that one day you don't carry this around like it's your ball and chain.
Absolutely. It is the prison we live in, right? It's that conditioned self. And we have to realize not only are we the prisoner, but we're the prison and we have the key. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
a very masochistic.
Yeah. And it seems like we don't have choice for a long time because unconsciously it's just operating in the background and we haven't come to the place of spiritual maturity to where we remember, oh, I am a powerful creator. I do have autonomy and authority over myself. And I can start questioning essentially what are these lies that I've built my whole identity around, right? Like this was just survival for me in terms of who I thought I needed to be in order to get the love that I needed to survive.
Exactly. And one of the biggest shifts there is when you go from acting in your traumatized, repeating the cycle state to I'm choosing me and what is actually best for me. And while there are stages between these two things, but that shift in the reality of even when you see someone that is hypersexual from their trauma specifically, go to a state of celibacy because they want to heal themselves and focus on their own needs before they continue to perpetuate the cycle.
Absolutely.
That period of not engaging with anyone else can also feel like imprisonment. But as the time goes on, it desensitizes and they realize, I didn't need that
Right.
or that.
Well, it's
And I,
outsourcing or thinking we're going to get our needs met through something external. Or we have so much intense sensation in our body, our nervous system can't handle. We need, whatever the addiction is, right? We need the release because it just gets too intense inside rather than expanding our nervous system's capacity for sensation and to be like, oh, I can be really uncomfortable or I can be really happy and I can hold that. I don't need to pick up my phone or turn on the TV or have sex or drink or whatever the thing is we're using food. We have all these different mechanisms to like take us out of that moment that just feels like too much.
exactly. And it's not actually coping, it's just numbing out.
Right. Right.
And
And
quite a
there's always that stage. I don't know if you know Portia Nelson, the autobiography, right? And it's just like you're walking down the street, you fall in the hole. It's like there are stages of consciousness and awareness, and at some point we can be like, oh, right, this is that behavior I have that is actually really harmful, and but we still can't choose differently. We just become aware of it, right? And then the next phase is, ooh, I'm not going to do that thing because I actually know that however good it might feel in the moment, it's actually really dangerous for me or harmful to my heart or whatever, right? And then we can just be like, oh, didn't choose that thing. And then suddenly that whole entire pattern gets metabolized. And then we don't even have to face that question anymore because it's just not a part of who we are and how we identify. But it's a process that takes time and the soma changes slowly, right? It's just like we have to be so compassionate with ourselves as we're untangling these knots and really living more from our authentic self rather than the conditioned self, because it just takes time and a lot of hard work, quite frankly.
and that is a big part of what people don't realize because there's no magic pill. And while we do have techniques that are causing rapid transformation, even though you can get to the root of what might cause your habit or how you feel today, you're going to have to spend a lot of time sitting with that, analyzing it, to actually release and begin to change the habit because often the root trauma or event is very core deep and will cause you to grieve even the fact that it happened, because it's very likely that you don't consciously remember it today in this moment.
Right. And I love that you talked about grief, right? It really is a grieving of the deep sadness that the thing happened, and then who we became as a result of that, and letting go. It's like that's the identity death, right? That is the shedding and the return to that super vulnerable part of us that's like now can, has the capacity to remember how lovable it is, to feel that safety start organically taking root in our system. And it is that downward spiral, as we meet the thing, and it kind of untangles a little bit, and then, and I think we do this until we take our last breath. Like, I think some people become enlightened and they really, have that spontaneous thing, but for most of us it's just very slow journey, and it will continue until this particular incarnation is complete.
Exactly. And even if you achieve a state of feeling enlightened, feeling like you've accomplished it all, you are unmovable emotionally, or you handle it well enough that it doesn't affect you, you still have to maintain it.
Right.
You have to continue. It's not you were Buddha today and then you give
Yeah.
up. No. If you're going to be
It's the
Buddha
it's the
today, you have to
practice.
keep continuing to do all
Yeah.
of those great things that make you feel that way.
Right. Every day, right? It is a spiritual practice. Like, what is the choice I'm making, and how am I, caring for myself, relating to other people, like communicating, self-expressing, all of that stuff. And yeah, it's a daily practice.
What is a word of advice that you would give your younger self?
It's a great question. A reminder of like, don't ever give up. Like, you will get this figured out. There is something, like you said, something greater moving you, and it does get better. Yeah.
I have to second that,
Yeah.
because I never thought that I would even live past 18.
Yeah. It's a
And
miracle,
and
honestly, that
here
I'm
I
alive as
am,
well. Yeah.
like almost a decade past 18, like crouching 30, severely accomplished in my career, got a best-selling book and everything.
Yeah.
But I never thought I'd be here. And I'm living proof. It gets better. You can overcome
Exactly. Me too.
anything.
Me too. No matter how. Well, the thing that this is another thing too of, I really believe that the depth to which the pain occurs is the exact opposite of the brightness of the soul that had the experience. So if it is so dark and so impossible, I mean, I was suicidal for much of my younger life, and like I just could not see a way out. And I now know that because my soul is so big and the light I carry is so bright, it, it counters the darkness. So it's like, if you're having that experience, it must be to discover that you are equally as beautiful and bright and divine as that pain and suffering has been.
Exactly. The true embodiment of yin and yang.
Absolutely, 100%.
Where can our listeners connect with you?
I have a website. I work with spiritual entrepreneurs who have a lot of terror of being seen. And so a lot of the work I do is the inner work and then the external work for them. So Jenn with 2 N Savage is my website, jennsavage.com. And then I'm also on social media at Jenn Tasnim, and can be found on Instagram or on Facebook.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today, Jenn.
So happy to have this conversation with you. Thanks for having me.
Right? And as all of you know, you can find me everywhere at Trauma to Bliss on social media and traumatobliss.ca. Thank you for listening, and you'll hear from me next week.